We will have a joint presentation, and I will start by sharing my screen here. Various audiences and listening situations, emotional effects on a historical perspective, music performances throughout history. When did we start listening and why? And we will present now 5 core areas historically. And the areas are antiquity, Middle Ages, Renaissance, industrialization, and the modern age. And we will start with antiquity. So the next slide, please. Antiquity is obviously, we think about ancient Greece here. Obviously, mankind has been singing and playing instruments and been musicking for many thousands of years. And music has been in every civilization throughout the world and in every culture. People usually sing and dance, and music for rituals, when people are being born, or when someone dies, or marriage, weddings, and so on, funerals. So rituals are very important for music. And obviously, with these civilizations that came about in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome in antiquity, Greece was very special because in Greece, they not only played and sang, they also developed ideas and theoretical concepts about music. So music philosophy came about, music theory, music terminology. The word music is from ancient Greek, the music word, the term, and also the music drama, the tragedy. And if you take the next slide, please. This is a picture of Pythagoras. You may know him as a he was into music theory. He discovered the intervals and the circle of fifths. He was also a mathematician, and he also sang and played the lyre. And he was also actually a music therapist, and he had several disciples. He developed ideas about music being in relation with the cosmos, with the stars, in alignment with the stars, and the intervals of music could be discovered through mathematics. If you take the next slide, please. Platon was really into music philosophy, and he saw a difference between ethic and aesthetic. You could play music because it's fun, or you enjoy playing music and listening to music. That's the aesthetical aspect, the quality of it. But there were also some ethic qualities, and he thought that you could actually sort of form an individual, you could civilize people by music. And he wanted to regulate how people used music. Next slide. This is a picture of ancient Greece instruments. And we know about this because they are on, objects, artifacts from ancient Greece. And in the Greece mythology, there was a god called Zeus, and Zeus had 2 sons, Apollo and Dionysus. And Apollo was the good son, the light son. He was associated with string instrument, the guitar and the lyre, playing indoors and using scales like the Dorian or Phrygian modes. And this music was also used by Pythagoras and used in music therapy. On the other hand, the bad son, so to speak, the dark and violent son was called Dionysus, and he also had a friend called Marsyas. Marsyas was a flute player, and he played the flute, the Aulus double flute, as you can see on the right-hand side here. And that music was being played outdoors. It was more associated with the Lydian and Mixolydian modes, and associated with partying and hedonism and drinking wine and having parties outdoors. And Platon wanted to actually encourage the Polonian side of things with playing indoors, lyrics with some poems from Greek lyric traditions, and using the Dorian and Phrygian modes. And he wanted to actually forbid the flute and music being played outdoors and using the Lydian and Mixolydian modes. So if we move on to the next slide, please. Now we move on to the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, obviously after ancient Greece, Rome came about and Rome became Christian. Christianity became the state religion under Constantine the Great in the late stages of the Roman Empire. And then it transmitted into the Middle Ages. And the Catholic Church was very powerful in Western Europe, and the Orthodox Church was very influential in the Kingdom of Byzantine. And now music was being separated from dancing. People couldn't play and dance at the same time, and the church took command of music, and the music was being played indoors in churches. Interestingly enough, the organ was actually being developed in ancient Egypt, and the organ was actually used as a military instrument in wars. But when Christianity was the state religion in Rome, the organ was a very powerful instrument in churches. So in the churches, organ and choir music was being encouraged. And there were monasteries all along Europe with monks and nuns who played music. And music was being performed in church and separated from dance. And also they didn't like instruments like drums, percussion being played in churches. So this is also the time when there was a development of notation of sheet music, which is very important for the further development of classical music. And so music was highly regulated by the church. On the next slide, please. Got Hildegard from Bingen, a German nun, was very, very interesting. She also is a saint, and she was the 10th child of a family, and they donated her to the church. And she had some revelations, and she spoke to God directly, as you can see on the picture to the right here. She got some revelations from God, and she could also communicate with the Pope and other powerful men at the top of the church. So she was really interesting, and she was the first female composer in the history of Western art music, as you might know. And so she was the first highly influential female composer in music during the Middle Ages. Then we move on to the next slide, please, with the Renaissance. And now there was some Protestants in Western Europe protesting against the Catholic Church, and also some kings, the King of Sweden, Gustav Vasa, or the King of England, Henry VIII. They wanted to separate from the church in order to become more powerful themselves. So there was a secularization going on. You see, these are the ruins of a monastery. And if you've seen this television series called, anyone seen Downton Abbey? Have you heard about that TV show? You know, Abbey was like a monastery, and the king took the monastery from the church and gave it to this family so they could live there in the Abbey. So the Abbeys was being sort of abandoned and being used for private homes. And now the courts wanted opera. So opera was a very new, powerful, profane genre in music, and started in Italy, in Fiorentina. And so there was a renaissance for ancient Greek culture, and this was exclusively for the privileged. And if you look at female composers such as Francesca Caccini, she was from a very wealthy and privileged background, which made it possible for her to play the lute and compose music for opera. So it was for the privileged. Now we will move on quickly to the industrialization here. In the 19th century, you know, the Industrial Revolution in England, and the concept of capitalism, of entrepreneurship. And this is now where the bourgeois, the middle classes are being more powerful after the French Revolution in 1789. And obviously, Beethoven was the first really successful music entrepreneur, and he managed to sell his music on the market on this marketplace to the new bourgeois middle class customers of classical music. So there was a separation and a classification here. The private parlors was very interesting. Could you move on to the next slide, please? This is a picture of a private parlor where concerts were being held in privacy. And this was an arena for female composers to play and sing. The piano was being a very respectable instrument. People like Franz Schubert wrote leads, songs in German for this kind of parlors. And if you didn't have a contract with a publishing firm, you could always arrange private concerts. And also there were concerts houses being built all over Europe. You know, when Felix Mendelssohn had this revival of Johann Sebastian Bach, you know, The Passion of Matthew. That was in a concert house in Berlin, not in the church, and it was sold out, and people were queuing all along the streets outside and couldn't make it to. And also, opera houses was being built here in the 19th and 20th century, and that was obviously, if you were very influential in society, you did go to the opera to enjoy the music, but you did also go there to network and to be seen and to establish business relations and so on. So there was like a separation, live music. Conductor was a new discipline in music, and the conductor was being like a new, you could work as a conductor. And bigger orchestras and new instruments such as the saxophone and so on. And also during this era, a new category in society came about, the working class. And the working class wanted popular music. And that's why popular music was being sort of promoted here for the working class. Next slide, please. Now we move on to the modern age. Does anyone recognize this picture here? Yes, a couple of you. It's from Dalarna in Sweden, Dalhalla, which was...
It's a lovely place.
Yeah, it is. It's very amazing. It was established in 1993. And actually, it's like a limestone quarry here. And the acoustics are really great for music. And also, it's very inspired by ancient Greek theaters. And interestingly enough, it started out as a venue for opera. And the name was actually inspired by Richard Wagner and Bayreuth and Wagner, Valkyrien and so on, and Valhalla. And but eventually it was so expensive to promote opera, so the arrangers wanted to have more and more popular music here. Some popular classical music like Robert Wells, Rhapsody in Rock, but also Pink Floyd, which is like a cover band playing Pink Floyd songs. You know that Pink Floyd played in Pompeii, in Italy in 1971, I believe, 72. And anyway, so now we move on to the modern age and classical music. It was a really great presentation yesterday, by the way, on the historical perspective of classical music. Classical music is no longer the norm in society. It's a lot of being a subculture, being marginalized a bit. And that's what we are here to discuss today. And obviously the advent of recording, electricity, digitalization, mass communication, streaming, all those things are sort of challenging for classical music. And live music is being more and more rare today. It's very rare for live music to be live music. If you go to popular pop music concert, most of the music isn't really live. It's being played back, playback, and sometimes they sing, sometimes they just mime, and so on. So it's very, very rare for young people today to experience live music. And in Stockholm, we go to the Berwald Hall with young students, and they can experience the dynamics of hearing music, not only in headphones, but hearing live music, by real orchestra. So classical music survived in Hollywood because some of the really talented composers from Austria, Vienna, like Erich Wolfgang Kongold and Max Steiner, went to Hollywood in the 1930s to escape from National Socialism and Anschluss, and they became very powerful composers in Hollywood, and they established the Wagnerian opera tradition in Hollywood, leitmotif and so on. Movies like King Kong, Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, as you might know. And today, classical music is alive and kicking in film music, Hans Zimmer and so on, and in computer games. So that's where classical music is relevant for young people. And I would like to have a discussion later on about the German Berlin orchestra called the Steiggreif Orchestra. Steiggreif means quick in German. Have you heard about them? It's a young orchestra. And they are having strategies to reach younger audiences with classical music. They play Beethoven and Brahms, but do it in a new way, which is very interesting. So that's where I will conclude this historical background. And now I will move on to Eva's presentation here. Thank you very much.